I happened to see my boyfriend's chat history. Someone had asked him whether he had a girlfriend. He replied casually, "Yes. But we can break up." I left without saying a word and blocked him everywhere. It took Evan a full month to realize I was gone. By then, I had already boarded a flight to Europe. When I finally returned, he broke down. On the eve of a major tournament, he showed up at my school without a second thought, standing in the rain outside my practice room. "It was just a joke," he said. "Why are you taking it so seriously?" Chapter 1. By the time I squeezed into the studio, clutching a bouquet of white baby's breath, the interview was nearly over. This episode of the Routine Esports feature happened to spotlight Evan. Because of the tight schedule, it was filmed directly at his team's training base. Under the camera lights, Evan wore a defiant, self-assured smile. Across from him sat a poised young woman. "All right, one last question that fans are really curious about," the host said. "Evan, what kind of girl do you like?" Evan raised an eyebrow, a hint of mischief flashing in his eyes. "The kind of girl I like," he drawled. "Lively personality. Cute. Good at games. And big eyes." The girl lowered her gaze, the tips of her ears quietly turning red. The crew exchanged knowing looks and laughed along. Only a few people in the room glanced at me with unease. I knew her. Her name was Yvonne, one of the most popular esports hosts at the moment. Lively, charming, highly professional, with a pair of beautiful, clear eyes. Their past post-match interactions had sent fans into a frenzy. People online called them a perfect match, two stars meeting at the peak. What few people knew was that Evan already had a girlfriend. I had been with him through the hardest years of his rookie period. 5 years together, yet never once made public. Unlike Yvonne, I was introverted, plain-looking, and completely clueless about games. The only thing I was good at, my only passion, was the piano. It felt as though my heart were being rubbed raw by coarse rope, bound tight and slowly twisted, pain spreading in dull waves. On the surface, I remained calm. My fingertips pressed silently into my palm. Under the lights, Evan's features were sharp and striking, a faint scar at the tail of his left brow, a black stud in his right ear. He looked bold and untamed, still bearing traces of the boy he once was. I set the bouquet down gently and turned to leave the studio. Evan was still smiling when his gaze swept over and caught on me. He paused, just slightly. Chapter 2. Late at night, Evan switched on the bedside lamp in the apartment. "Anna," he said, standing by the bed, his expression tense. "Are you mad?" I didn't answer. I pretended to be asleep. He leaned down to kiss me, his lips brushing my ear with practiced indifference. "It was just for work," he explained on his own. "You know how it is now. Teams and players all need exposure." When I didn't respond, Evan moved closer. The crisp scent of lemon mint washed over me, mixed with a trace of tobacco I didn't recognize and didn't like. I frowned instinctively, my body stiffening. One of Evan's hands slid to my waist. In the shadows beyond the light, he lifted my chin and kissed me the way he always had, effortlessly familiar. His tongue pried past my lips, tangling with mine, creating the illusion of deep affection. Just an illusion. I pushed him away. He froze for a moment, then frowned. "What's wrong?" "Evan," I said quietly. "When are we going public?" The warmth drained from his eyes. "Why bring that up all of a sudden?" He took a breath, impatience creeping in. "Didn't I tell you? After I win Worlds. And if you don't?" I looked at him. "If you never win, does that mean I stay your secret forever? Hidden away like some underground pet?" His expression darkened further, anger simmering beneath the surface. "So you're still upset about today?" "I told you, it was just work." I spoke gently. "Evan, an esports player's job is competition. Your credibility comes from results. Flirting and manufactured scandals aren't part of the job." I might not understand games, but I wasn't stupid. The truth struck home. Embarrassment flickered across his eyes. After a long pause, he stood up, retreating. "I'm going to take a shower." Chapter 3. The sound of running water echoed from the bathroom. I propped myself halfway up out of habit and picked up my tablet, opening the music app. Instead, an unfamiliar interface filled the screen. I glanced at the top corner and realized it was logged into Evan's account. It was my tablet, but Evan used it occasionally. I tried to switch accounts, but my finger slipped and tapped into the messages, pulling up the direct messages page. The newest message at the top was impossible to ignore. I didn't even have to open it to see the preview. Yeah, but we can break up. As if to preserve what little dignity I had left, I opened the message anyway. It was from Yvonne. She'd noticed Evan was online, greeted him, exchanged a few casual lines, then jokingly asked whether he had a girlfriend. And Evan's reply was exactly what I had just seen. Yeah, but we can break up. Yvonne didn't respond. The water was still running in the bathroom. Holding the tablet, I thought for a long time, trying to pinpoint when things between Evan and me had started to go wrong. I couldn't figure it out. Eventually, I grew tired of thinking. Exhausted. The sound of the shower finally stopped. I turned off the tablet and set it aside. Evan came out of the bathroom, droplets still clinging to his hair. Seeing me leaning against the headboard, lost in thought, he asked, "What are you thinking about?" I stared straight ahead. "Evan, let's break up." Chapter 4. Even as I said it, sadness welled up in my chest, impossible to suppress. I really did like Evan. But I couldn't live like a pet locked away in a basement, surviving on the scraps of affection he tossed me now and then, lying to myself. Forever clinging to illusions. Forever hidden from the light. Evan could get anything he wanted now. Whatever he wished for, he had. But I wasn't the wind. I wasn't the rain. I was a living person. It was time to wake up. Evan took several deep breaths before finally saying, "Anna, don't joke like this." "I'm not joking." He stared at me for a few seconds, then suddenly laughed. "What right do you have to throw a tantrum?" he said. "I'm not who I used to be." "And you? As an sports player's girlfriend, you can't even name the heroes properly. You're just not as good as Yvonne. Am I wrong?" "You're not," I said calmly. "That's why we're breaking up." His gaze locked onto me, fury surging in his eyes. The next second, he grabbed the bedside lamp and slammed it onto the floor, shattering it. "Get out," he said. "This is my apartment. Get out." Chapter 5. He wasn't wrong. It was his apartment. Back when I had just started college, Evan had insisted, against all reason, on renting this place not far from my campus. I told him he was rarely around anyway, that renting an apartment just to leave it empty was a waste. But he wouldn't budge. Back then, he would lift his chin, a boyish spark in his eyes. "I like it empty," he said. "That way, whenever I miss you, I can come back here and wait for you." Evan had always been stubborn. I couldn't talk him out of it, so I gave in. Before I knew it, over the past 2 years, I had filled this small place with so many traces of myself. When Evan wasn't around, I came regularly to clean and organize, keeping everything neat and orderly. But as his career took off and his schedule grew busier, the apartment sat empty more and more often. By my senior year, for the sake of convenience during my internship, I was living here alone most of the time. It took me 15 minutes to pack up everything in the apartment that belonged to me. Evan sat quietly on the couch, a cigarette between his fingers, his eyes fixed on me without blinking. The room was thick with smoke. I coughed a few times and struggled to haul my suitcase toward the door. Evan tugged at the corner of his mouth, a mocking smile playing on his lips. "What do you say? Want me to walk you out, pianist?" The once affectionate nickname sounded unbearably ridiculous now. My heart felt like a soaked towel, twisted hard and slow, pain pouring out in steady streams. I forced a smile with every ounce of strength I had left. "No need. Player Evan," I said. "From now on, we don't need to see each other ever again." Chapter 6. A faint crack appeared in Evan's expression. But in the end, he watched as I walked out the door, making no move to follow. The door closed behind me. Alone, I dragged my suitcase along the roadside, with no destination in mind. I blocked Evan on every platform and shoved my phone back into my bag. It was already late. There were few cars on the road. Streetlights glowed quietly as I found a bench at a bus stop and sat down. On the billboard behind me, Evan stood beside his teammates, smiling brightly as always. My nose stung, and tears fell one after another. A police car passed by, then circled back. The door opened, and a female officer stepped out. She walked over to me, her tone firm. You're a student at the nearby music academy, right? What happened? Do you need help? I'm fine, officer, I shook my head. I just really want something my mom used to make. Chapter 7. Evan and I grew up together. We were childhood friends, and his favorite food was the braised pork my mom used to make. His family situation was complicated. His parents divorced, and neither of them wanted him. With no one at home to look after him, he often came to our place for meals. My mom would say, "That poor kid. We're neighbors, adding one more pair of chopsticks costs nothing. If we can help, we should." When we first started elementary school, she prepared eggs and milk for me, and always made an extra portion for Evan. At first, Evan was like a little hedgehog. On the way to school, he would always trail far behind me, unwilling to walk by my side. One day, I finally stopped and asked him, "Hurt, do you really hate me that much?" He looked flustered and hesitated before shaking his head. "That's good, then," I said with a smile, walking over and taking his hand. "Let's walk together." Evan froze for a few seconds before cautiously squeezing back. By then, I had already started learning piano. Evan's room was separated from mine by only a single wall. Many times, he would sit quietly on the other side, listening as I practiced Czerny, Bach, and Bayer. He told me, "Anna, you play beautifully. You have to keep playing, always." I smiled, my eyes curving. Of course. When Evan was barely a teenager, he discovered video games. With no parents to rein him in, he skipped classes, spent time in a grimy internet cafe, and stayed out all night. He wasn't good at school, but he was exceptionally gifted at gaming. Within just a few months, everyone in the area knew there was a prodigy. They said he was born to go pro. I didn't really understand what that meant. I was just worried. So one afternoon after school, I went alone to look for Evan at an underground internet cafe. Through the thick haze of smoke, Evan sat slouched on a battered couch with peeling leather, surrounded by people watching his hands fly over the controls. I called softly, "Evan." He stiffened, hastily putting out the cheap cigarette in his mouth, panic flashing across his face. In front of everyone, he abandoned the game mid-match and dragged me outside, his face pale. At the entrance, he snapped, barely containing his anger. "Anna, are you crazy? Is this somewhere you should be?" I was confused. "If you can come here, why can't I?" "Because I'm not the same as you," he said through clenched teeth, his voice rough and strained. "You and we're not the same kind of people." I looked at him, worried and tentative. "Don't you want to keep studying? What are you going to do in the future?" "I have my own plans," he said, turning away. "Don't worry about it." My throat tightened. Maybe I looked too upset, because Evan softened. He glanced at me, took a deep breath, and spoke carefully, word by word. "Don't worry. I'm going to become a professionally sports player." Chapter 8. That was the first time I ever heard the term professionally sports player. Evan told me that gaming was also a competitive sport. That playing games didn't automatically mean being irresponsible. If you were good enough, you could still earn respect. He said, "Anna, trust me. I'll become one of the best professional league players in the world." As he spoke, his eyes shone with a brilliant, dazzling light. I listened carefully and nodded just as seriously. "I believe you." Opportunities came quickly for Evan. Not long after starting high school, a well-known club reached out to him after spotting his ranking near the top of the server leaderboard. Evan left on his own for another city, entering the team's training academy and beginning a grueling regimen. Every so often, he would still come back. Each time he did, he would climb over the fence of my high school and sneak over to the first-floor practice room to watch me. The day he confessed, I remember it clearly. I was playing Clair de Lune by Debussy. When the piece ended, I lifted my head from the keys and unexpectedly met his bright gaze. I ran over and slid open the practice room window. "Why didn't you call for me?" Evan rubbed the back of his neck, the tips of his ears turning red as he avoided my eyes. "It sounded nice," he said. I wanted to listen a little longer. I laughed. "They're just practice pieces. Someday, I'll invite you to my concert." He lowered his gaze, his eyes settling on mine, his voice soft and gentle. "All right, then, pianist." My heart skipped. I instinctively stepped back, wanting a bit of distance. But Evan reached out, caught my arm, and pulled me back. He lowered his head, resting his forehead against my shoulder. Anna, I'll become the best in the world. I paused, then replied softly, I know. His hand rested against my back. After a long moment, I heard his voice, trembling with nerves. Then would you be willing to be with the future number one in the world? I said yes. Evan smiled, his reddened eyes filled with a mix of humility and longing. He tightened his arms around me, holding me close, and whispered his promise by my ear. One day, I'll stand under the brightest lights on the biggest stage and tell everyone that I like you. Chapter 9. How ridiculous. The boy who once spoke with absolute certainty, who told me to be myself, eventually began to look down on me for not knowing how to play games. Evan changed, little by little. I couldn't say exactly how. Ever since I was young, I'd always been slower than others when it came to anything outside of piano. Maybe because of that, I failed to notice how Evan and I were gradually drifting apart. Our message history grew thinner and thinner, most of it just me talking to myself. Such nice weather today. How is it over there? There's a little cat downstairs in the dorm. I had really good fried chicken rice today. Occasionally, he'd reply with a line or two. I'd say, training must be tough. Take care of yourself. He'd reply, okay. I'd say, I went to the library today and accidentally cut my finger on a page. It really hurt. He'd reply, idiot. I told myself he was probably just busy. He played better and better. His fan base kept growing. His career was taking off. I should have been happy for him. He still never made me public. And I felt him growing more and more unfamiliar. I saw articles online. They called Evan a genius, an ace, a rising star. That night, he was right beside me, slamming his keyboard in frustration. I glanced at the clock, it was already 3 in the morning, and said softly, Evan, it's late. You should get some sleep. He was completely locked in, eyes bloodshot, not sparing me even a glance. You don't understand, he snapped. Don't bother me. I sighed, put on my headphones, and turned away to sleep. The next morning, I clumsily checked his match history on my phone. A full page of red losses. He was sleeping beside me, one arm hooked around my waist, his face buried in my hair. Stirred by my movement, he half opened his eyes, hummed softly, and said, I love you. I swallowed the words I'd been about to say. I told myself he was already under a lot of pressure. I should be more understanding. Hold on a little longer. He still loved me the way he always had. He was just exhausted. Once this phase passed, things would get better. But slowly, I stopped being sure that this phase would ever pass. Chapter 10. The day Evan won his first spring split championship, I brought flowers to the airport to pick him up, hoping to surprise him. I'd done this many times before when he returned from tournaments. Every time, he'd been happy. But that time, there were far more fans than usual. I stood on the outer edge of the crowd, struggling to protect the bouquet in my arms, but it was useless. The moment Evan and his teammates appeared, the crowd surged forward, crushing the flowers out of shape. Pushed from all sides, I was forced backward. Someone tripped me by accident. I fell awkwardly to the ground, a dull pain shooting through my knee, my eyes stinging. Evan left, surrounded by the crowd. I pulled out my phone and called him. He glanced at the screen, and hung up. The shouts around me came in waves, like the tide. They were all yelling his name. Hero. Hero. That was his player ID. I had chosen it. When Evan was 18 and had just started playing in the minor leagues, he'd called me to ask what his debut ID should be. He whined, you know I don't understand English, pianist. Help me pick one. The call went on for so long that my phone grew warm against my ear. I grabbed a pen and scribbled on a blank sheet of paper until I finally wrote down a word. Hero means hero, I said. I checked, your game has a lot of heroes, doesn't it? Evan laughed mischievously. Why is someone secretly researching my game? Are you that into me? Blushing, I dodged his teasing. I'm being serious. Just go with a hero. It even sounds a bit like your name. All right, Evan drawled, his tone indulgent. Whatever you say. Then I heard the soft sound of him kissing the phone. You don't need to change anything for me, Anna, he said. It doesn't matter if you don't understand games. You're you. Just do what you love. Truthfully, I had a selfish thought. Back then, I secretly believed that Evan was my hero alone. In the vast airport, Evan's figure grew farther and farther away until it disappeared. He finally became hero. But he no longer seemed to be my Evan. I sat on the cold, polished granite floor, clutching the crushed bouquet, my heart wrinkling in on itself like the wilted flowers in my arms. Chapter 11. I should have understood long ago. Just as he said, Evan and I were never on the same path. Once I was no longer sure whether the person I loved me back, I shouldn't have continued. The policewoman drove me back to campus and spoke to me gently, trying to comfort me. She said that as long as you're alive, nothing in this world is truly impossible to get through. Before leaving, she still seemed worried, reminding me to take care of myself and to contact her anytime if I needed help. My roommate Emily was up late gaming. When she saw me dragging a suitcase into the room, she looked shocked. "Weren't you going to see that mysterious boyfriend of yours? Why are you back with a suitcase?" I smiled. "We broke up." Emily fell silent. I slid the suitcase under my desk and asked, "Did you finish checking everything for the Europe study program?" "Oh right, you hadn't reminded me, I almost forgot." "I'll double check," she said. The music academy I attended was internationally renowned and often offered overseas study programs. The next one was a month-long exchange at a top music conservatory in Europe. The selection process had started 3 months earlier. I had applied, passed the review, and already taken care of my passport. I'd originally planned to tell Evan after confirming the final itinerary in the next few days. Now, there was no need. The flight was 5 days away. 5 days later, I boarded a plane to the UK with my classmates. To keep myself from wavering or being distracted, I removed my domestic SIM card and focused on studying and traveling abroad, staying in touch with family and friends online instead. Right now, I truly needed some time to clear my head and calm myself down. Chapter 12. After spending some time in Europe, my mood gradually eased. England was beautiful, just cold. On a weekend break, our class organized a trip to the seaside in Liverpool. Back home, summer hadn't even ended yet, but there I was on the Liverpool coast, bundled up in a thick jacket, shivering from the cold. Emily couldn't take it anymore and ran to a nearby stall to buy a steaming box of curry noodles, then came back and shared them with me. Nearby, a group of male classmates were discussing this year's League World Championship, their voices carrying through the cold wind. "The finals are in Paris this year, right? What do you think, should we fly over to watch?" "That depends. If no domestic team makes it to the finals, what's the point? Hero's on fire. He's a lock for finals. Might as well start picking the championship skin already." The guys burst out laughing. Suddenly, the curry noodles in my mouth tasted bland. British food really wasn't very good. Emily was something of a casual fan of Evan's. All these years, she had never known about my relationship with him. Now, she slurped noodles while watching Evan's live stream on her phone. At this hour, it was probably already past midnight back home. She muttered, "Why is Hero still streaming at this hour? That's strange." I didn't think much of it. That's not weird, is it? Esports players usually stay up late. True, but I still feel like something's off with him lately, even his ranked games seem unfocused. "I don't know what's going on," she sighed, then glanced at me in surprise. "You even know about esports players? I thought with your piano brain, you didn't care about anything outside music." I ate slowly. "I won't anymore." Chapter 13. The study program went very well. A month later, I returned to campus with the rest of the group. The next day, as I passed the faculty offices on my way to class, someone suddenly called out to me. It was my homeroom professor from college, a woman with graying hair who still carried herself with unmistakable elegance. I stopped and asked politely, "Professor Williams, is there something you need?" She frowned slightly, looking a bit troubled. "Anna, have you recently upset someone?" I froze. "Why do you ask?" "Well, while you were away on the study program, a young man came looking for you," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Quite good looking, about this tall. Do you know him?" It was Evan. I was a little surprised he had come all the way to the school. Seeing my silence, she called my name again, worried. "Anna." "I'm fine, Professor Williams," I replied calmly. "He's my ex-boyfriend. He probably hasn't fully accepted the breakup yet. If he comes again, please tell him I'm studying in Europe and won't be back for now." Professor Williams nodded in understanding. All right. I understand. I'm sorry for causing you trouble, I said apologetically. She waved it off. It's nothing. Don't worry about it, she said, then grew serious. Anna, you're a talented and diligent student. You need to focus your energy on the piano, understand? Yes, I do. Thank you, Professor. I bowed slightly and turned to leave, but Professor Williams called out to me again. Her brows drew together. She seemed to hesitate for a few seconds before speaking once more. The registration for this year's Chopin competition has begun. Would you like to give it a try? Chapter 14. The Chopin competition, officially, the International Chopin Piano Competition. One of the most prestigious piano competitions in the world, held once every 5 years. One distinctive feature of the Chopin competition is that its judges award prizes strictly based on performance. If they believe no contestant is worthy of a particular prize, that prize is simply left vacant. And in the history of the competition, there have indeed been several years with no first prize winner. Of course I wanted to try. I had studied piano since childhood, won many awards, and was considered highly gifted. By the age of 14, I had already begun to make my mark in international competitions. Later, when my family fell on hard times, I didn't go abroad for college. I supported myself through part-time work and enrolled in the best music academy at home. After receiving my answer, Professor Williams instructed me to practice diligently and said she would follow up with the registration details later. I hugged my sheet music to my chest, my mind completely occupied by the Chopin competition. So distracted was I that I failed to notice a figure slipping out of the shadows, trailing behind me with a dark intensity. It wasn't until I stepped into the practice room and closed the door that a long, well-defined hand suddenly shot out, slamming against the doorframe, gripping it so tightly the knuckles turned white. I looked up. Through the glass, I saw Evan, his face twisted with fury. Anna, he demanded, what the hell do you think you're doing? Chapter 15. The door pressed down on Evan's fingers. I instinctively loosened my grip. I knew exactly what a professional sports player's hands meant. Evan took advantage of the moment to force his way inside and locked the door behind him. The practice room curtains were half drawn, leaving most of the room in shadow. Step by step, he drove me backward, his grip relentless as he clutched my wrist. Where did you go? Why didn't you tell me anything? Why did you block me? The questions came one after another, crashing down on me. I struggled hard, but couldn't break free. Calmly, I said, let go. Evan froze. He seemed thrown off, as if he had never seen me like this before. But almost immediately, a fiercer anger surged up. You're ordering me around? You're hurting me, I said, staring at him, enunciating each word. Please let go. Evan released me, stunned. His fingers curled into his palm, his gaze wavering. His voice softened. I'm sorry, Anna. I just couldn't find you, so I was confused. In the past, he could go 3 or 4 days without replying to a single message, throw me out onto the street late at night without a thought for my safety. Tell others that this girlfriend of his could be broken up with any time. Now that I had done exactly what he said, why was he suddenly panicking? Even the fact that I'd blocked him, according to Professor Williams, he hadn't noticed until a full month later. What was the point of continuing a relationship like this? I let out a long breath. Don't look for me anymore, I told him patiently. We've already broken up. Chapter 16. The wind stirred the curtains. Evan stood there in a daze, taking a long time before he found his voice. What? You asked what I meant, I continued calmly. I meant exactly that, we're broken up. That night, you kicked me out onto the street. Do you remember? Evan stood frozen. After a long while, he spoke with difficulty. Don't break up. I was just too angry then, he said. I went looking for you afterward, I sat down and calmly lifted the piano lid, unwilling to listen anymore. Let's leave it at that. I need to practice. Evan stepped toward me and suddenly grabbed my hand. Anna, didn't you hear me? I said you're not allowed to break up with me. The piano lid, not yet fully supported, lost its balance and nearly slammed shut. It was light, but my palm still went numb with pain. I frowned. Evan looked flustered, reaching out to lift the lid again, then stopping halfway. I turned and looked straight at him. What am I to you? I asked. If I want to break up, what are you going to do? Will ruin my hand? Evan's eyes were red, like a child who knew he'd done something wrong. I didn't mean to. I felt exhausted talking to him. I pulled my hand back, reopened the piano lid, and unhurriedly rubbed my left hand where it had been struck. Go back, Evan. You still have matches to play, don't you? After that, I treated him as if he were nothing but air and began to practice. The melody flowed through the cold, silent room. Evan refused to leave. After a long time, he asked, why? I thought for a moment before answering. You said you had a girlfriend, but you could break up. I don't like being broken up with. So I broke up first. Sorry about that. Evan's face darkened. You looked at my chat history? Did you forget? That was my tablet, I replied calmly. You should have been more careful and logged out. I paused, then smiled. Although, maybe I should thank you for being careless. Evan pressed his lips together. He explained weakly, there's nothing between her and me. I didn't do anything. Suddenly, I remembered many things. The messages he never replied to. The arrogance and disdain he couldn't hide when I didn't understand esports matches. The way he began to belittle and suppress me for no reason, flaunting his ever-swelling confidence and pride. He hadn't always been like this. Once, he would look me in the eye and tell me, word by word, how good I was. Two people don't have to drift apart because of a third party. I turned a page of the sheet music. You don't need to explain, I said with a smile. I don't care. Evan stared at me for a few seconds. Anna. Well played. He turned and left, slamming the practice room door with tremendous force. The sound was deafening. I walked over and carefully locked the door. A single tear splashed onto the cold metal handle. My tear. I raised my hand and wiped it away, carefully. Chapter 17. For a while after that, my life was calm and uneventful. The school was preparing for a concert, and I became even busier with rehearsals. Because of Emily, I still heard bits and pieces about Evan from time to time. She said his performance had been wildly unstable, with repeated, baffling mistakes. What pushed him into the spotlight was a behind-the-scenes video. During a review session with the team and coaching staff, Evan appeared visibly distracted. One teammate finally snapped, grabbed Evan by the collar, and nearly came to blows with him. Online, criticism and abuse blended into a single roar. Everyone was asking the same question, what happened to Evan? Rumor had it that the team was already considering a roster change for Worlds. 2 more weeks passed, and I traveled with the orchestra for a performance. When we got off the bus back on campus, a familiar junior walked beside me, discussing a few imperfections in the performance. Evan was waiting at the school gate. He looked even more haggard than before, his gaze locked onto me. As if he no longer had a life of his own. Passers-by kept glancing over, whispering to one another. I walked over with a sigh. What is it? Anna, he said. Are you still mad? I felt a headache coming on. Was I not clear enough last time? Evan, we've broken up. What are you angry about? He asked softly. Tell me. I'll change. I had no choice but to repeat myself. I'm not angry. I just broke up with you. It's because I ignored you too much before, right? Evan grabbed my hand, his voice hoarse. I was just too busy. I only wanted to wait until I won a championship and then. I'll pay attention from now on. Can you just? A male voice interrupted from nearby. Senior, are you done? The professor's waiting for us. It was my junior, Julian. I caught the note of rescue in his voice and nodded. I'm coming. Chapter 18. Evan stood there, dazed, watching us walk away. After we'd gone some distance, Julian hesitated and couldn't help asking, that person just now, was your ex-boyfriend? Yeah, I replied. Do you know him? Julian smiled and shook his head, a dimple appearing in his cheek. Julian was an excellent violinist. We'd collaborated several times before and worked together smoothly. But now, online, many people were twisting and fabricating rumors about my relationship with him. Because Evan kept showing up at the conservatory to wait for me, gossip spread rapidly. Much of it was pure speculation, accusing me of abandoning him, cheating, and breaking his heart, claims that supposedly explained his drop in performance. Furious fans vented their disappointment in Evan's results onto me, hurling all kinds of obscene abuse. Of course, there were also people who spoke up for me. Fragments of my past with Evan were dug up. From the timeline alone, it was clear we'd known each other since childhood. Some even revealed that during Evan's poorest days in the youth training system, when he could barely afford food, it was my piano tutoring that supported him. One comment, likely from a former student of mine, declared confidently, "This woman taught me piano, she was gentle and patient." I saw that guy a long time ago too. I even heard him ask her for money. People should stop picking sides so fast. Careful not to get slapped in the face later. Another commenter claiming to be an internet cafe owner chimed in, "Let me say this. Heroes from our place. Everyone around here who gamed knew about his girlfriend. We used to joke that Hero wasn't good enough for her." Someone who'd read through countless threads suddenly woke up, "Wait, so Evan never went public, was flirting with Yvonne, and now this? Isn't this just him getting full of himself?" Voices clashed from every side, the argument boiling over. Thankfully, I didn't spend much time online, nor did I have the energy to prove myself to strangers. Julian glanced back at Evan, now so far behind us he was barely visible, and said softly, "What a pity." I didn't quite understand. What's a pity? Julian smiled, his expression easy, but his words unexpectedly sharp. It's a pity he's still alive. I didn't know how to respond, so I just smiled. Julian gave me a half smile of his own. Don't think about him. Come on, I'll treat you to milk tea. Chapter 19. The much-anticipated League World Championship arrived quickly. Teams everywhere were packing up to head overseas, and Evan's team was no exception. In the end, management couldn't bring themselves to give up on him. It seemed Evan had finally resigned himself to reality and decided to focus on the competition. I didn't expect that on the night before their departure, something would go wrong again. That night, rain poured down in sheets. After finishing my practice, I planned to head back to the dorm early. When I looked up, I saw Evan outside the practice room, soaked through. "Why are you here?" I asked in shock. "Shouldn't you already be on your way abroad for the tournament?" Evan held out a rigid, gold-colored cardboard box. I froze. That box was where I used to keep the keepsakes tied to him and me. Polaroids from the amusement park we'd visited together, concert tickets, train and plane tickets from our long-distance trips. I had collected them all, carefully storing them in that memory box. It was filled with our shared past. Now that it was no longer needed, I had naturally left it behind. Rain streamed down the window like tears. Evan looked at me through the glass, rain and tears blending together on his face. "You can't let me go," he said hoarsely. "Jojo, you loved me so much. You can't just stop loving me like this." My eyes stayed fixed on the gold box as I answered slowly. "Yes, Evan. I liked you." Hope flared suddenly in his eyes, like a drowning man clutching a lifeline. But the light died just as quickly. "Because I continued, but I've decided not to like you anymore." I told him that I couldn't control my feelings, but I could control my reason. I didn't regret ever liking him. Once, I had loved him with everything I had, wholeheartedly, without reservation. Being foolish isn't shameful. Continuing to be foolish is. Evan still stubbornly tried to explain himself. "That line you saw that night was just a joke. Why are you taking it so seriously?" "Just a joke." I really did feel like laughing. I answered honestly, "Yes, Evan. I've always taken things seriously. Anything. Anytime. I've always been that kind of person." He grew up with me. He should have known that. And yet, even now, he thought I broke up with him because of that one sentence. That wasn't it. I paused, looking at him with an unusual patience. "I touched a piano at 3 years old. Since then, aside from black and white keys, my life has been almost entirely you. But Evan, what did you ever do for me?" Evan stood there, speechless. I was certain that in that moment, countless memories must have flashed through his mind. His expression collapsed into something painfully undone. I said, "Evan, after all these years, you still don't understand me. I've always had the courage to start over from nothing. You're different. You're a coward. You think you're uniquely gifted, but you don't realize that talent is the most common thing in the world." Outside, the wind howled and the rain lashed down. Word by word, gently, I drove the blade straight into his heart. "You wasted your talent, and you wasted my sincerity." Chapter 20. In the end, Evan didn't compete in that year's World Championship after all. It should have been his greatest dream. I didn't understand how he could give it up so easily. But it was his choice, and I neither could nor needed to say anything more. When the wind passes over a lake, ripples form, but the water doesn't hold on to it. For a while, everything about him was debated fiercely online. Soon enough, no one cared anymore. Still, he continued to come to the school to look for me, as if nothing had changed. I rejected him firmly several times. Later, I grew tired. Thinking he would eventually give up, I stopped reacting. Slowly, he stopped coming. That year, during the Lunar New Year, snow fell over my hometown town. Evan walked through the snow and came to my house with bags full of gifts, seemingly hoping to persuade me indirectly through my parents. My mother knocked on my bedroom door. After I told her she could come in, she pushed it open. "Anna, Evan is here," she said. "Do you want to go out and see him?" I smiled and shook my head. My mother understood immediately. She closed the door gently. Through the door, I heard her speak softly as she turned Evan away. "Anna has her own thoughts. As her mother, I can't interfere, and I won't. Evan, please take your things back with you." I didn't hear Evan's voice. After a while, the front door closed. From outside my room, my mother asked, "Anna, can Mom come in?" I walked over and opened the door. When I saw my mother's gentle face, an overwhelming sense of grievance washed over me. Tears spilled out soundlessly. She didn't ask what had happened. She simply stroked my hair again and again, repeating the same words. "My daughter is the best person in the world. Mom will always believe in you. Go walk your own path." Chapter 21. The following year, I won first prize at the Chopin competition. After that, my calendar filled up fast. Rehearsals, tours, interviews, days folded into days, and I learned what it meant to be carried forward by momentum. Flowers began arriving. Applause became routine. The name I had once whispered only to myself started appearing on posters, in headlines, on programs handed out at the doors of concert halls. I was no longer someone's secret. I was finally my own. Evan still came sometimes. He would sit in the front row and listen. But the house lights were always low, and once I sat at the piano, there was nothing in the world except the keys. Later, Julian and I returned from an overseas tour. Media and fans crowded the airport, pressing forward with cameras and congratulations. In the middle of the noise, Evan stood holding a bouquet, his eyes rimmed red. I recognized him instantly. Others did too. Without a word, people shifted, making a narrow space that belonged to him alone. He waited at the far end of the exit corridor. When he saw me walking toward him, something flickered in his face, bright and fragile at once. His lips moved. "Congratulations, pianist." I glanced at him once, then looked away. The crowd surged, voices rising around me. I passed him without slowing. Smiling, I said, "Excuse me."
Evan, side story. Chapter 1. I've always known that I wasn't good enough for Anna. But what Anna never knew was that the reason I became an esports player in the first place was her. I was the product of a failed marriage, unwanted by both parents. My father worked on ships far from home. My mother remarried and built a new family. Once in a while, they would show up, hand me a little money, then disappear again. They left me in the old house next to Anna's, like an outdated toy they no longer cared to keep. I had nothing. And I didn't even know who I was supposed to prove my worth to. Anna was different. Ever since we were little, she was the kind of child teachers and parents loved, the model student. Gentle, diligent, standing clean and upright like a lotus untouched by mud. She looked soft, but in truth she was resilient. She knew what she was good at, what she should do, what she wanted to become. She moved forward without distraction, focused and unwavering. She had talent for piano. She was kind to everyone. And everyone around her was kind in return, supporting her, believing in her. Standing beside her, I always felt inferior. Because I had no dream. And I didn't have parents who were patient and gentle like hers. At first, it took everything I had just to stand next to her without running away. She was too bright. So bright that even looking at her made me want to retreat. And yet, I couldn't stop myself from liking her. A creature born in darkness, how could it refuse the light, even knowing it would be burned? Chapter 2. Maybe it really was the times that created heroes. That was how I found esports. I clung to that path with everything I had, because somewhere in my mind was a vague, persistent thought. This might be the only way I could ever stand beside Anna with any dignity in the future. Anna knew none of this. In her eyes, there was only her piano. Sometimes that made me angry. There was a restless, uncontrollable impulse inside me, urging me to pull her away from everything else, to claim her entirely. But every time I met her clear, unguarded gaze, I would calm down just as quickly and feel ashamed of my own darkness. For Anna, I trained like my life depended on it. And eventually, I earned my chance to play in the minor leagues. I couldn't wait any longer. I ran back to my hometown, climbed over the wall, rushed to her practice room, desperate to confess. The wind howled, crushing against my chest. White curtains fluttered in the air. She sat by the piano, just as she always did, playing Clair de Lune. She should have been my moonlight. But moonlight is too gentle. So gentle that it made me forget that it never truly belonged to me. Chapter 3. I don't remember exactly when I started to change. I became a star player, the kind everyone adored. Crowds cheered my name. People lost themselves over a single precise move of mine. The esports world is a gaudy, swirling divat. Once inside it, you meet all kinds of strange people and experience sensations you've never known before. Money, fame, desire. They spilled out before me like overflowing treasure, free for the taking. I sank into it quickly. A small-town boy who had never even received love from his parents was never going to withstand that kind of collision unscathed. I forgot my original intention. Slowly, I began to feel that Anna was ordinary. The people around me invited me to all kinds of decadent places. They laughed suggestively, saying that competition was exhausting and a little indulgence was only natural. I refused. But even as I refused, I felt secretly pleased with myself. I thought Anna had no idea how much I'd given up for her, how many temptations I'd turned down. No one loved her more than I did. Yet she stayed the same as always. She didn't worship me, didn't praise me. Gradually, something inside me tipped out of balance. Before I realized it, resentment had taken root. I began to distance myself from her on purpose, to test her, hoping she would show more affection, offer more praise. But Anna seemed not to notice at all. I don't know what made me so certain back then that she would never leave me. Maybe it was how long we'd been together. Maybe it was how compliant she had always been. Either way, it went to my head. I deliberately said that line to Yvonne and deliberately let Anna see it. I waited for her to cry, to explode in anger, so I could pull her into my arms, comfort her, kiss her. I never imagined she would choose to leave instead. Chapter 4. Originally, I had planned to propose to her after the World Championship. I'd already bought the ring. I told myself that as my girlfriend, she deserved the grandest, most dazzling debut. Looking back now, I realize I never once considered what she wanted. It was never for her. It was for my pride. For my own self-satisfaction. But was anything I did really love? Chapter 5. When Anna blocked me, I thought she was just throwing a tantrum. But when my message bounced back with a glaring red exclamation mark, panic rare, sharp panic hit me. After the panic came anger. Drowning in my counterfeit glory, I convinced myself she had no right to defy me, forgetting entirely who had walked with me to this point. Or rather, I refused to acknowledge the filthy, despised version of myself from the past. So when I found her again, my first instinct was still to interrogate her. The calmness in Anna's eyes frightened me. I realized I might truly be losing her. And yet I couldn't understand why. I was 100 times, 1,000 times better than I used to be. She could accept the old me, why couldn't she accept the current one? I smashed the lamp, sulked, cut off contact, determined to teach her a lesson. I told myself over and over that once I won the world title, she would come back to me. I was wrong again. Chapter 6. 2 days before departure, I went back to our apartment. Everything that had belonged to Anna was already gone. But inside the low cabinet beneath the TV, I found a gold cardboard box. It was the outer box of a skincare set I'd bought her with my first paycheck. Without thinking much, I opened it. My hand slipped, and the contents spilled across the floor. They were all memories of her and me. Memories I don't know why I had forgotten. A red string bracelet she braided by hand. A keychain we bought together. A hard-seat train ticket from a journey that lasted an entire day and night. There was a period during youth training when I was so broke I lived on instant noodles at the team base. When I'd hit rock bottom, I told her quietly about my situation. She nodded, thoughtful. Not long after, I received a few $100s from her. Only later did I find out that she'd taken piano tutoring jobs, splitting her tuition and earnings just to support me back then. One year, during a heavy snowfall, I went out of town for intensive training. Because she missed me so much, she hid it from her family and took a day and night train to see me. When she finally reached me, her cheeks and hands were red from the cold. She looked at me with watery eyes and said she was freezing. I tucked her hands into my coat and felt an overwhelming mix of guilt and heartbreak. Later on, my mother passed away. Even though she hadn't taken much care of me, I was still devastated. I didn't want Anna to see me weak. I stubbornly told her not to come, didn't tell her exactly when I'd be heading home. But she tracked down my train schedule through my friends and learned I'd be transferring through a port city. So that day, she bought a short-distance ticket and waited at the platform gates in Harbor City from 7 in the morning onward, leaning against the railing. She didn't actually know when I would arrive. She'd only heard that I would be passing through that day. Still, she widened her eyes and watched every single person coming through the gates, carefully, earnestly. She was certain she would recognize me. And finally, she did. I looked exhausted, worn thin. I hadn't wanted her to see me like that, but when Anna recognized me and threw herself into my arms like a little rabbit, I couldn't say a word. I lost the ability to speak. Tears poured out of me. My throat choked tight as I held her and cried like the most useless child alive. The tears I hadn't shed at the funeral broke loose all at once as I asked, "Why did you come?" Anna looked at me, her eyes beautiful and clear. "So you'd have somewhere to cry," she said. I sobbed until I could barely breathe. How could someone be this foolish? How could someone be this good? How did I lose someone like her? I had sworn to myself back then that I would never betray Anna. Why did I forget? I picked up each item from the floor and pressed them against my chest. Suddenly, nothing else felt important. Nothing mattered except Anna. I no longer knew what I was even competing for. Chapter 7. The team fired me. My former organization was both furious at my wasted potential and still convinced of my ability. They introduced me to another team's coaching staff, offering me a behind-the-scenes role, no longer in the public eye. I kept going to see Anna, as I always had. I tried so hard to pull myself back up, to gather the courage to lay everything bare before her. But she truly became like the moon, no longer responding to me at all. After one concert, Anna was giving an interview. Her partner, the one who always smiled in a way that made people uncomfortable, suddenly walked over and sat beside me. Surprised, he asked. I didn't want to engage, but still replied, "Surprised by what?" His gaze settled on Anna, openly appreciative, without restraint. "Evan," he said, "don't think you're the only one who can make something of himself while still young."
At this point, my love life is a public service announcement. Free of charge.